Hello, students. The focus of this week's module is climate. As usual, we'll start broad. What is climate? Why do we have it? And why do we, as architects, care about climate? Then we'll talk about the differences between a global climate and a microclimate. Next, we'll talk about some different kinds of climate data and what they tell us. And we'll end our lecture today with a discussion of different climate-related design strategies. Climate can be loosely defined as kind of your average weather patterns. Weather is what happens every day, climate is what happens year after year. It used to be thought that climate was permanent, can't do anything about it, but we now know that humans can change the climate. Mark Twain was wrong when he said, everyone talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Unfortunately, humans have now done something about it. And why do we care as architects? Well, it turns out that as we've been discussing this semester, we can actually have some impact in climate change by paying attention to the climate and using climate responsive design strategies to create climate responsive buildings. So why do we want to do climate responsive buildings? It's because they use less energy and therefore have less contribution to global warming. They are, quote, gentle, or they have less impact on the natural environment. And interestingly, they also have some positive benefits for your occupants. Mainly, there is higher indoor air quality, mostly because of increased natural ventilation. More attention paid to thermal comfort. There's a lot of psychological benefits associated with passive design and the connection to your natural rhythms, daily rhythms with the sun, and also seasonal rhythms. Okay, and finally, hit that bottom line, hit that pocketbook. A climate responsive building will likely have lower utility costs. So climate as we know it here on the Earth is primarily a function of the sun and also the rotation of the Earth. And so here's a couple of interesting illustrations from your textbook. Let's start with this one right here, figure 5.2a. The main source of heat in our atmosphere on our planet is the solar heated ground. So the sun's radiant energy comes through our atmosphere relatively unfazed, all right, hits the ground, heats the ground up, and that energy, that heat is radiated out into our atmosphere, heating up our the atmosphere that we live in. All right. Your next illustration shows you how this heat is being moved around our planet through convection. So we just talked about, let's see, radiation, but energy is transferred, heat is transferred around our planet also by convection. And finally, the rotation of the Earth has a large part to play in climate and producing some winds. When you're thinking about climate for a building project, for an architectural project in specific, you can start broad and think about the global climate. Are you located in the tropic or the temperate or the Arctic zones of the Earth? Narrow it a little bit into some climate regions or zones, each of which will have regional guidelines. And here in your textbook, we're about to talk about the different climate regions in the US. They've divided it up into 17 regions. But once you're within that region, the climate can actually vary quite wildly. And we call that your microclimate or your local conditions. And finally, at the kind of the bottom of this funnel here, the most fine pieces of information is the specifics of your building site and building location, because your particular lot could have different conditions than the one that's just a few blocks away. So here's an example for you. And I choose to take a look at San Francisco, both because I happen to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's got this great Mark Twain quote, the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. So the climate in San Francisco, are we in the tropic, temperate, or the Arctic? It's the temperate climate. Which climate region? It's US climate region number 6, which is coastal and mild. The microclimate of San Francisco, it's very famous for its cold summer fog, right? Which is not not true for the entire climate region number 6. It's very specific to San Francisco. And finally, a particular building project might have some site specifics. For example, a steep south-facing slope. All right, everyone. In this video, we covered what is climate and why do we as architects want to pay specific attention to it. In the next video, we'll talk about some different types of climate data and what those will tell us about our particular building site.